Hey there, chess fans. Today we're going to look at a classic game from British chess history. This is Botvinnik-Basman from the 1966 Hastings tournament, which was a pretty strong tournament. Basman came in third. It was a good result for him since he was a comparatively unknown master. His rating was probably around 2,300 at that time. Botvinnik had just lost the World Championship in '63 to Smyslov, but his rating was probably in the 2,700 range. As a matter of fact, a year after this Hastings tournament, he played in Palma de Mallorca and came in second behind Larson, but ahead of Smyslov, who was still the current world champion. So he was no pushover, that's for sure. Let's get right into the game. Botvinnik opened c4. e5 was played. Knight c3, knight f6, knight f3. And this is the English three knights system, an opening that I know practically nothing about, so I won't be commenting too much during this phase of the game. g3, bishop b4, bishop g2, castles, rook to e8, d3. And here there's a crossroads for black. h6, knight to d4 had been played, and white seemed to do well from those. d6 has only been played once, but black won that game in some pretty high level opposition, so that's a playable but rare alternative. But the normal move that most people played is bishop takes c3, and this of course gives up the bishop pair in return for some double pawn weaknesses. Now this doubled pawn, although it strengthens the center, and of course white has the two bishops, can be a liability in the endgame. So e4, knight to d4, e takes d3, e takes d3, knight to d4, c takes d4, and d5. Now black has played the opening well. It's reached a position where white has only managed 50%. Botvinnik tries to complicate here to avoid a draw against a much weaker player, but in the process he hands Basman some chances. The normal move here is a bishop to g5, but Keane says this is blatantly drawish, and in fact most of the games in the database seem to reach a draw from here. So Botvinnik tries to vary, and he plays bishop to e3. This move had actually been seen before, but probably not by Basman, who uncorked bishop to e6. And this is a new move. That's only been repeated once after this game, and black won the game. So it seems like it's a good move. Rook to c1. This is perhaps a slight inaccuracy from Botvinnik. Perhaps he wasn't taking this game too seriously. Better than rook to c1, where rook to b1 or queen to b3, exploiting the weakness of b7 that just occurred from the bishop coming to e6. So rook to c1 was played at any rate. In this position, Basman plays h6. Botvinnik replied h3, and Basman strengthened his center with c6. Obviously he doesn't want to take on c4, which would straighten out white's doubled pawns. So c6 was played. Queen to d2, played by Botvinnik. And now queen to d7, and that's putting some heat on the h3 pawn. So king to h2. And now the computer actually likes d takes c4 here, but of course it's understandable that Basman wants to keep the double pawns, as I mentioned before. So he played king to h7. Rook f to e1. And now a good maneuver from Basman here. He plays knight to g8. And he's going to reroute the knight to e7, where it keeps an eye on f5. g4. Knight to e7. Bishop to f4. This bishop ends up being a tower of strength for Botvinnik. Rook a to d8 is played. c5. Now we have a locked pawn structure. G5 is played. Bishop to E5. You can see this bishop is very well posted here. F5. G takes F5. Bishop takes F5. In this position, Botvinnik played rook to E3, but the computer likes F4 with the following continuation. G takes F4, bishop takes F4, and it's about equal. Both sides' kings look a bit exposed, but equally exposed. But instead, after bishop takes F5, he played rook to E3, as I mentioned. Knight to G6, attacking the bishop. Rook C to E1. Rook to E6. Obviously, he's going to double here. Bishop to G3. Rook D to E8. Bishop to F1. Queen to G7. Rook takes E6. Bishop takes E6. Bishop to E5. Now he plays queen to F7. He could have played knight takes E5, but after D takes E5, position is pretty equal. So queen to F7, bishop to G3, and now Basman plays queen to F5 here, but he had an interesting alternative in knight to H4 with something like bishop takes H4, G takes H4, rook to E5, rook to F8, bishop to G2 to cover the check that would have occurred on F2, and rook to G8. It's an equal position. So Basman's move after bishop to G3, queen to F5 was just as good. Queen to D1, rook to F8, and now this pawn at F2 comes under some pressure. Bishop to G2. Better was probably queen to D2. Rook to F7, just safeguarding the 7th rank. Rook to E3, queen to F6 is attacking the D4 pawn here. You can see that these pawns are a bit of a liability for white. Queen to E1, and of course you can't take the pawn now because of rook takes bishop. So bishop to D7, getting out of the way. Queen to B4, and he's attacking the B7 pawn, but he had no need to defend this. In the game he played G4, which is an interesting move, but he had a good try in knight to F4, because after knight to F4, if queen takes B7, then he loses to knight to G2, king takes G2, bishop to H3 with a discovery on the queen. If instead bishop takes F4, queen takes F4, and that's actually going to win. Instead of all of that, after queen to B4, Basman played the interesting G4. And now Botvinnik probably should have played queen to B2 with the likely continuation. G takes H3, rook to F3, queen to E6, rook takes F7 check, queen takes F7, bishop takes H3, bishop takes H3, king takes H3, and black is a little bit better here, but not much. Instead, after G4, Botvinnik played H takes G4. Bishop takes G4, queen to B2, and now H5 is played by Basman, but here he probably had a real chance to mix things up a little bit with knight to F4. Bishop takes F4, queen takes F4 check, king to H1, H5, bishop H3, bishop takes H3, rook takes H3, queen takes F2, rook takes F5 check, king to G6, queen takes F2, rook takes F2, and this is good for black. The computer considers that black has a significant advantage in this position because of the weakness of white's pawns and the difficulty of white in activating his rook right away. So another line after knight to f4 would have been, instead of bishop takes f4, you could have played king to g1, h5, f3, knight takes g2, king takes g2, bishop takes f3 check, king to h2, bishop to g4. And this is also very good for black. Instead, in the position in the game, after queen to b2, h5 was played, king to g1, h4. This pawn is a bit ominous looking. Bishop to d6. Now this ends up being another good post for the bishop. Queen to f5, bishop to f1, bishop to f3, king to h2. And black has a serious advantage in this position. The material is even, but the initiative is with black, and these pawns on f2 and in the center and then a2 look a bit weak. So now Basman plays a good move. He plays bishop to d1 with the simple threat of queen takes f2. So there is actually no adequate way to defend this pawn. So Botvinnik jettisons it. f4, knight takes f4, queen takes f2. Botvinnik's not quite losing, but it's pretty dire for him. It's only through his vast experience being three-time world champion that he manages to save the game from this point. So, knight to g6 was played. Of course, Basman doesn't mind the liquidation into the endgame. Queen takes f5, rook takes f5, king to g1, bishop to g4, a4, king to h6. He wants to nurse his pawn down to the queening square if possible. Rook to e8. Now this rook is kind of a pain back here. Rook to f7, of course, protecting his pawns on the 7th rank. a5, a6. Didn't want any funny business with white playing pawn to a6 himself. Rook to e3, king to g5, rook to e8 again, king to h5, rook to g8, h3, and black is steadily making progress here. Rook to e8, knight to h4, rook to h8 check, king to g5, rook to g8 check, king to f5. Now you can see the problem that black has. This bishop on d6 makes it difficult for the black king to come forward, especially with the rook on the last rank ready to deliver checks. So in this position, Botvinnik played king to h2, knight to f3 check, king to g3, knight to d2, bishop takes h3, bishop takes h3. So black has given this pawn back, but after king takes h3, knight to b3, black has a choice of pawns to take. So this was a crucial point in the game, according to Basman. He had to make the decision, knight takes a5 or knight takes d4. Now, he said he took on a5 because it gave him a passed a pawn, but perhaps knight to d4 would have been a better try, as it centralizes the knight with a position such as after king to g3, knight to d4, rook to h8, knight to e2, check. Both Hayek and Rybka think that black has a substantial advantage here, if not quite a winning advantage. Instead, after king to g3, he took the other pawn, as we mentioned, in order to achieve this passed a pawn. King to f3, knight to b3, king to e3, rook to h7, rook to f8, king to e6, rook to e8, and now black has a very important decision to make. which way to go with the king. It seems that Basman perhaps chose the wrong way to go. Probably best here was king to f6, with the bishop to e5, king to g6, king to e2, king to f7, rook to d8, a5, with something like king to d1, a4, king to c2, king to e7, rook to a8, king to e6, and this threatens knight takes c5, winning a pawn at least, rook to g8, rook to f7, king to c3, knight to c1, king to d2, knight to a2, rook to a8, knight to b4, rook takes a4. Black has lost his a pawn, but he still has a bit of an advantage. Probably not enough to win. We'll go back to the game. The game was rook to e8. He could have played king to f6, which we just looked at, bishop to e5. And now instead of king to g6 that we just looked at, he could have played king to f7, rook to d8, king to e7, rook to d6, king e8, king f4, knight c1, bishop f6. And black is actually doing quite well here. So this was probably his best line. But, as I mentioned, after rook to e8 check, Basman had some idea that he could bring his king over to the queen side and help out over there, but it doesn't work out. The rook and the bishop coordinate rather well and stifle black's ambitions. King to d7. This is probably the point where Basman lost his winning chances. Rook to b8. Rook to h3 check was played. King f4. Knight a5. King f5. Black's king is awkward. Basman could have probably forced a draw by playing rook to d3, rook to h8, rook takes d4, rook to h7 check, king c8, king f6, rook takes b4, and now white gets a perpetual. Rook h8, king d7, rook h7, king c8, rook h8. There's absolutely nothing that black can do here. So in this position, after king f5 in the game, we just looked at rook to d3, which seems to lead to a draw. Instead, he tried a b5, which is exploiting the fact that white cannot play c takes b en passant because he would lose his bishop. So he played rook to g8, rook f3, check, king to e5, rook e3 check, king f5, rook to f3, king e5, rook to e3 check, king f5. Of course, he could have taken the draw here, but he decided to go for it, played b4, but rook to g7, king to c8, rook to c7, king to d8, rook to a7, knight to b3, so that if the rook takes on a6, he can take the pawn on d4, bishop e5, a5, rook to b7. See, this is very dangerous for white because of these two connected passed pawns, but as I said before, the position of white's rook and bishop versus black's king make the draw a certainty at this point. Rook takes d3, rook to b8 check, and it's going to be a perpetual. After the game, Botvinnik said that Basman was among the most gifted of British players, and that his play reminded him of Vladimir Simagin. I'm not sure the pronunciation of that. So a draw was agreed, as I said, and Basman lost his chance to enter chess immortality by defeating the great Botvinnik and winning a strong tournament while being a relatively unknown master. But it showed he had some real chances here. Now, Keane has said of Basman that he feels like he has a very strong grasp of strategy, and that had he stuck to conventional openings, he had no doubt that Basman would have become a grandmaster, and probably a strong one at that. but his experiments with unorthodox openings probably cost him that chance. However, had he not gone in that direction, the world would have been deprived of a lot of very entertaining chess. Anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll see you with another chess video very soon. Thank you.